Hi, my name's Nick Francis. I'm the Chief Technology and Marketing Officer for Brooklyn Vendor Assurance. I want to talk to you today about why automation needs to be a central focus on any supplier management function. To do that, I'm going to take you through a series of slides.
Vendor Ops, leveling up your vendor management.
So the first one being typically how, not necessarily like this visual, but how most organisations segment their vendors. So a lot of organisations will look at the suppliers that they use in their supply chain and look at them from what are the most critical or high risk, all the way through sort of what are the strategic, tactical into sort of a transactional group. And what they then break that into buckets of is what are we going to actively manage and what are we going to reactively manage or passively manage. And then from that, there's a notion that they want to get across 20% of it. So there's a Pareto laws rule, 80% of the spend, 20% of the vendors in this case. So there's that aspiration to always get across and reactively manage against a set of governance standards, the more critical vendors that there are or more critical suppliers that there are in an organisation, which makes sense. And like I said, typically that aim with most organisations we speak to is around sort of the 20% mark. However, the reality is when we talk to prospects and customers, barely 10%, a little bit above that is being managed to in an effective manner against those governance standards. So how does an organisation change away from that and look at the first problem, which is how would, in one step, you remove like 90% of the risk of all the vendors that sit in your supply chain? And you wouldn't necessarily do that by managing the first or the biggest 10% where most of the spend sits. You'd look at how you could use a set of baseline standards to cover things like a supplier code of conduct, to talk to your vendors around how are they resilient from a business perspective, how do they conduct their business, are they anti-slavery, are they sustainable, and are they stable as a supplier? And through that, you'd like to do it through periodic reviews and assessments that are updated on a regular basis. And if you did that same consistent baseline across the majority of your suppliers and your vendor supply chain, you'd remove 90% of the risk in one swoop. So there's a really justifiable reason how you can take that single activity and put that across the entire supply chain and all your supply landscape and get a decent return and reduce 90% of the risk if done in the right way and well. Couple that with the aspiration that many organisations in reality would like to manage actively a third of their vendors, so 20 to 30% here. And you start to see that's very different from the original scope of the 10% that was there before that is being covered today. So when you do that and you compare that, you have this new kind of shape that formats out, which then applied to the scope you've got today. To cover that, you're going to need, in the first case, to do the 20 to 30% actively managed, and then that baseline management of de-risking. You're looking at you're going to need up to sort of 6 times the resources. And without a really significant compelling event, 99% of organisations are unlikely to get 6 times the resources they've got today. So how can you look at addressing this without that increase of resources? How can you look to do and cover this scope, this requirement, this shape that you saw earlier on here in these two aspects with the same resources or less today? Ultimately have to change in approach. So you have to repurpose the current scope to look at thinking more around high level activity. So they focus on activity that requires a higher degree of thinking and a higher degree of engagement with your suppliers to talk about value creation, such as innovation and joint planning that have to be done on a case-by-case basis. But then you ask what happened to the bottom of that, which is the lower thinking activity. Well, in that case, what you look to do for that risk baselining, for that engagement of your vendors across all segments to a certain level of checking the stability, the resilience, etc., plus some of the active management activity, you look at repurposing that to get to a point where you've got automation in place. So you have a baseline of activity and a baseline of your policy that's covered out by automation and robotics. So you've got this repeatable volume-based set of tasks that can be defined in a workflow and driven through automated policies, engaging through sort of data collection exercises. Depending on the response from the vendors, they're triaged down, and then you're alerted to it when you have to get engaged on a case-by-case basis and as an exception rather than the rule. So you can, through the design of how you would make this funnel, engage with your vendors at a very significant volume and triage it down to where the human element gets involved, which comes back to the earlier point of you save your resources, your people, this high value activity once automation has driven out all of the large scale engagement that's required. So So why bother? Well, so there's some proven economic impact in terms of managing all your vendors effectively at this baseline level. And it breaks down between anything from 6 to 10% cost reduction against your spend under management. So the cost of all your vendors combined on an annual basis, looking for a 6 to 10% reduction out of that. The studies you can look at, one by Boston Consulting, summarise that by using digital data services to manage tail spend, you can cut annual expenditure up by 10%. There's a Gartner study that also says that you can get nearly 7 times the investment you made and a savings back of 6% by managing the direct spend in this manner. And there's also one that was conducted by the Hackett Group that estimated 7.1% on average can be achieved by managing the tail better. We think those are average figures. We see it flex anywhere between sort of 15% and the 7% you see here. But like I said, same resource, you're unlikely to get relief in terms of a volume uplift in terms of that. You need automation, you need digitisation if you are to get across the scope and to do the repeatable, more mundane tasks that isn't just akin to keeping people satisfied in their roles. Need to use a digitised tool or digitised platform to do that. Hope that was useful. Please get in touch. Feedback also welcome. Thank you.
To keep up with the latest Vendor Ops news, subscribe here and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Links in the description below.